Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl. Join us for our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series where we are returning to all 10 nominees, talk about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts with the films. And before we dive into the day, if you're new here, consider a like, comment, subscription. Helps us grow, helps you stay connected for the rest of this series. And today, I think is a very, very special episode because we're talking about a movie Matt and I, spoiler alert, didn't really love the first time around, but we've come around to it. But our guest has loved it since the beginning.
So welcome in, Film Drunk. John, thanks so much for coming to speak to us on this movie. How are you doing today, man?
I'm good. I'm tired, but I'm ready. Your resident half Korean here to talk. I'm ready.
Obviously,
to go.
the only reason we brought you, right?
That's right.
That's it. That's it.
For sure. I respect.
Yeah. Yeah. So our video's titled "Can Past Lives Win Best Picture?" So let's start with that. Can it win Best Picture? No.
No. End video
I
right
mean,
here.
There we go.
Crazy
That's
enough,
it. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Crazy enough, when we first started our predictions all the way back in like March of last year, I did have Past Lives winning picture because this kind of goes into my opening thoughts with the film. Out of Sundance, people were hyping this up, saying it's the best film they've seen of the decade. It's easily going to be the best film of the year. No script will be better. No narrative will be more engaging. No film will break your heart more. And I guess just going to my first viewing of this, I saw it all the way back in June during its first initial theatrical release. And I have to say I found myself a little underwhelmed in all of those aspects. I thought it was a good movie. It was solid, a strong 7 out of 10, but I didn't leave it thinking it's the best film of the year. And maybe that's me coming in with too many high expectations, but I did enjoy it. I really liked Teo Yoo's performance. I thought he was the standout of the film. I saw a lot of myself in his character. I've seen a lot of people who I've interacted with throughout my life in his character, which I guess was my entry point into the film. And here, rewatching, I was very anticipated to see how my thoughts would be with the film. And I think most of my issues were resolved on this time around. I went from like a solid 7 to like a pretty strong 8. I connected a lot more with the sense of connection, whether that is someone that you've used to know or someone that you know now, as well as the perspective of your partner. I think John Magaro's scene in the bedroom is one of the year's best. It's kind of funny, we just talked about Maestro the other day. I think both these movies are near the bottom of my Best Picture lineup, even if they both have my 2 favorite scenes of any film in our Best Picture nominees. And I still think the first 50 minutes of this movie are phenomenal. Everything before the modern day would easily rank in my favorites of the year in terms of films. I think when we hit modern day, some of my issues start to arise a little bit more. I'll dive into those just here in a little bit. But Jonathan, what are your thoughts, I guess, from your first time watching this and now on subsequent rewatches?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I definitely loved it the first time, but it's hard. It's just human nature. When you see the reactions and reviews out of Sundance, it's hard not to just set it at a almost unattainable spot. And for
Absolutely.
me, my basic brain, when I hear that people are like sobbing at the audience, my brain thinks like I'm waiting for like the biggest emotional gut punch in this movie. And I love that. Like I actively seek for things to move me or destroy me, whichever. Like I absolutely love that. So I went into it, and once again, I did love it. I gave it 4.5 stars, so 9 out of 10. So that's obviously I loved it. But I felt like I didn't see where people were just fully knocked out by it at the end. And I think that was my one hiccup. I loved watching the stories. I loved the characters. I loved just following her and him in kind of separate paths. I loved it. And I wanted it to kind of go to that level that I assumed everyone else was talking about. And I felt that I didn't get it. And that was the reason it wasn't a 5-er. And then I rewatched it with my fiance and I think a couple of her sisters or friends or whatever. And, who you watch it with definitely influences you, like for sure. But for whatever reason, everything just fell into place in the second rewatch. And then that whole bar scene where he's talking and Teo Yoo is going on his heater of a monologue, where I agree with you, Dan. I think he is, I don't want to say by far, but I will, by far the best performance in this movie. Just absolutely moved me. From that scene all the way to the very end where she's walking back to John Magaro as the score is kicking in, I felt like I got it. I felt like I understood what everyone was talking about. So that is when I bumped the score up to a 5, which I don't give out too many times, and it was one of my favorites of last year.
You're touching on something that really, really makes a lot of sense to me, which is festival hype can often really doom a film because sometimes the way people talk about a movie, it creates a film in your head that no actual movie can really be. And the way people were talking about Past Lives, it just wasn't the film. You heard so many people saying that, like, you know, it just clicks into place right at the end, and it's this huge emotional gut punch. But what this film succeeds so much at is subtlety. It's a film about those small moments. It's about the little conversations. It's about the feelings that you can't express. And that's what the film is. And so to hear out of festivals people being like, this is the most emotionally powerful film of the year, it creates an image of something that no film really can live up to. And so I'm always cautious of those festival reactions, not to get my hopes up too much. But yeah, definitely, if it was the movie that everyone was talking about it being from Sundance, you know, that huge emotional sweeping romance, maybe it would have been a Best Picture win contender. But what it is, I think, is something much more unique, much more impactful than your average romance. It's so much more than that. But yeah, I was also impacted the first viewing with those way too high expectations. I liked it a lot, but it felt like half a movie to me. You know, I'd heard so many people say the first half is slow and then it kind of just clicks into place and suddenly it punches you. And I didn't get that. When it ended, I was like, okay, so where's the second half of the movie? So I loved this movie on a second watch. And the interesting thing I found is I felt like I was watching an entirely different movie the second time. Something I love about cinema is how your life experiences can change the way that you view a movie. And even though I only saw this movie back in June, 7-8 months ago, I have definitely had a few experiences in that time frame that have made me see this film entirely differently and have changed the meaning of the movie. And there's so many movies that I look forward to growing with, that I look forward to getting older and going back to, because new experiences will make me see them differently. And I didn't expect in just 8 months to be like, oh my God, I get it now. Like, I see this in a new light. I understand all of these different aspects that had just completely flown over my head on a first viewing. So yeah, this movie touches me deeply. I wept when I watched it last night. I thought it was so moving, so impactful. It's just a beautiful, beautiful film.
We talked about our general thoughts of Past Lives, its Best Picture nomination, something that, like we mentioned, was very expected up front. Then it became a question over the course of award season and ultimately made its way into Best Picture. However, Screenplay was something that was always going to be nominated for. Some people had it winning. Some people may even still have it winning. But I think the script worked a lot better for me on this time around. As I mentioned, I still loved the opening 50 minutes on both of my viewings. I think the way it dives into childhood romance, where it's not very romantical, it's more of who is around you as you're growing, as you're having fun little memories, and it's just taking tests at school or walking home or going to the park. But then I very much really resonate with the section of their Zoom connection or their Skype connection here, I guess. I've had a relationship that sparked over Zoom where that's the only time you could talk to the person because they lived 8 hours away in a car. So like, I very much found a lot of realism in that scene, where sometimes here in like romantic movies, romantic dramas, romantic comedies, where stuff is very heightened, very unrealistic, I very much appreciate the realism during those moments. You can just tell from the script, from the dialogue, and especially from their performances, what they're feeling without it being overtly obvious the whole time. Clearly, Nora wants to see him again. Hae-sung is making it kind of his mission to see him, but their timelines just don't line up. And we see the tragedy play out full force, because it first starts off with missing a call, then it's missing multiple calls, then it's calls kind of seeming awkward, and to the point of having to stop them overall. where some of my issues with the script start to arise are in the modern day. I think some of the realism, at least in my experience with something similar to this, kind of go out the window, where I understand the way they went about it could be realistic for Celine's song if this is autobiographical, but to me, some of the actions very much seemed like, oh no, we're just doing this because it progresses the story. I think there's so much complexity in this type of runtime, and it's not overtly showy like I said before, but it's very delight in like a weird way. I really love this tidbit about the screenplay that involves extras. Whenever Hae-sung and Nora are together, all you see in the background are couples holding hands, taking pictures, making out. Sometimes it's a little extreme. There's a scene where they're like on like a pier the first time they're walking, and it's a 2-shot of them, and all you see is this one couple behind them making out for 5 straight minutes. And I'm like, okay, that's probably enough making out here, guys. I get the point. But besides that, I really like
directing those extras, being like, sorry guys, we need one more take. I'm just gonna need you guys to eat each other's faces for like 5 more minutes. Sorry, just one more. Just one more. But I really like the use of extras there. And then whenever we see Arthur with Nora, they're either isolated. There's no other couples around them besides the time they meet at the the writers' retreat when the other writers are there. But every other time we see them, there's no one else around them. They're in their house. They're talking outside. There's no one ever else around them. So it kind of feels isolated in that's your only option sort of thing. And then when they're all three are together, you're back to seeing either singles around them when they're walking to the bar, or at the bar there's more couples surrounding them. And then that's when John Magaro's author is feeling very isolated because these two people are talking next to me. No one's talking to me. I'm surrounded by couples. Again, I don't know if that's as much as a script thing as a director's thing, but I very much appreciate that in the second half. Thing. That's a really cool thing. I gotta ask you guys, do you have any favorite lines from the movie? Because obviously there's the big one that everyone's talking about. You dream in a language I can't understand. Like, oh my god. Oh, the flames coming off of Celine Song's pen writing that line. Unbelievable. But are there any other like lines, moments, little bits of wisdom in here that really stick out to you guys?
My mind just keeps going back to the bar. I mean, when he's like talking about who you are as someone who leaves to him, but like to John Magaro's character, what's his name? Arthur?
Yeah,
right? Arthur. Yeah, but like to Arthur, you're someone who stays. Like something like that is just, I don't want to sound like corny, but like weirdly profound to me, and like. Yeah, I guess just that's probably the line that sticks with me the most. Besides the "see you then" at the end, which just banger of a mic drop on that one. But yeah,
for me, I think it would be the Arthur says this as well. But you make my world so much bigger, and I'm wondering if I do the same thing for you. Because even if you don't verbalize that in a relationship, at least for me, I've always felt that when I'm in a connection with someone, like they make me feel so much special. But do I do the same for them? And I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about that bedroom scene multiple times here again, but I just think the writing there is hitting on everything I really wanted, where some of the other parts of the second half of the script aren't as much doing that for me.
Mm-hmm. Something I love about this script is that Celine's song can make it so subtle, and there's such moments of quiet, and yet she can drop these absolute bangers of quotes and make them feel like something someone would actually say. Like there's so many moments in this that feel like movie dialogue where it's like that line is perfectly written. You make my world feel so much bigger, or even "see you then" is such a movie thing to say, but it sounds real. It sounds like these are things people would say to each other. And I don't know how you write like that, because a lot of the time when people try to do quotes like these in a film, it comes off as fake. It comes off as overly written. And this movie's not overly written. Something I love about the script as well is just the way that it balances all these themes, where Hae-sung almost doesn't even represent like a lost love. It's almost as though he is a representation of an entire culture, an entire place, that he is her link back to Korea. And for Arthur, when he sees Hae-sung, he doesn't just see a romantic threat. He also sees that she will always innately be tied to a past, to a culture that he will never fully be able to understand, that he will never fully be able to be a part of. And it goes into that feeling of am I insignificant? You know, am I enough for her, or is she always going to be drawn back to this life that she left behind? It's so beautiful. There's so many layers to this. God damn, the script is just, it gets better and better the more I think about it. It's amazing.
Yeah, one thing that breaks me in movies about relationships is if it doesn't work out between the partners based on circumstances essentially out of their control. I think in most people's life, if you break up with someone, you want it to be like on your own terms or each other's own terms, whatever that means. So like I think of like an anecdote like about my friend who was in a relationship in high school. They were going to go to different colleges out of state. So instead of trying a long distance thing and there's a possibility they stay together, or there's a possibility that their feelings just slowly dwindle down until they don't really care for each other anymore, what they did is they had like one last like good date and then they essentially cut it off. They broke up. And that is something that I always still think about, because then it's like it is kind of on their own terms, but you never know what would happen if they were just happened to go to the same college. Like maybe they'd still be together, maybe they'd be married. And then that just kind of brings me back to past lives, where it's just, even in something like a La La Land, even, which is, I know, the most like mainstream example, but like there's like a reason why that finale like breaks so many people, because you essentially see what could have been, and Teo Yoo's monologue in there is essentially that in just the purest form. So
Absolutely.
That's what it just moves me.
One other line that I just remembered sticks out to me so much is in the first couple of scenes of the movie, Hae-sung and Nora's moms are sitting together in a park, and they say to each other, why would you want to leave Korea? You have such a great life here. And Nora's mom says, well, sometimes you have to leave something behind to find something else. And that's the whole movie summed up in one line, that oftentimes we do have to leave things behind. And that doesn't mean that all good things are going from our life. It just means that we will have to painfully part from one thing in order to move forward, in order to find something else. It's kind of to what you were saying. Something that really struck me recently is I went to the wedding of a high school crush in the summer, and even though I have not had feelings for this person for like almost a decade, there was still a feeling of like, damn, like that's a chapter of my life officially closed. It's been officially closed for 10 years, but there's still that moment of like, damn, what would have been? It's so interesting. And yeah, it's just there's so much in this film that it just makes you think, makes you ponder, makes you wonder, and it asks difficult but beautiful questions. But let's talk Celine's song. What a masterful filmmaker. What restraint in the filmmaking. Oh, man. I want to know what she's going to do next. I want to see whatever movies she's doing. And I wonder if they're going to be like Past Lives, or if they're going to be a little bit more in your face. I love this style, though.
Isn't she doing another like rom-com? Or not rom-com. Like another romance movie?
It's called The Materialists, but I don't know what it's about. It's A24 again, so that's good.
Yeah, I think Celine's song script packs so much into it, as we talked about, but I think her direction does it, but in a completely different way. Obviously, this is not like a technical juggernaut. We're not feeling on top of the world as some other Best Picture nominees would make us feel, but I walk away feeling very understood of a lot of her creative decisions throughout. I mentioned the extras before, which I think spark so many interesting thoughts and so many interesting situations that we find ourselves in. Obviously, Past Lives does feel like a first feature to me. There's some creative choices packed in, but they're not always the most expertise, I guess, for lack of words, of ways to do them. I guess kind of like how we felt about Bradley Cooper with A Star Is Born, with his then elevation to Maestro, where like you can see the signs there, but they're not fully mastered yet. But I do like her use of camera, especially again going back to that Skype sequence of how sometimes we are just watching the screen. Sometimes we're watching them react to the screen. And I think there's a lot of interesting ways that she goes about putting the camera. I think of the one from their first meeting in New York City, where we start out super wide and they casually walk towards the camera as we slowly pan down and get a little closer and chat with them. I think that shows some very creative flair behind the camera. But yeah, I don't think this is a bad directed movie or anything. It's just not one to me I would jump up like, oh yeah, nomination, but I still think it's very well crafted and very well directed.
Yeah, I think with a movie like this, it's hard to kind of be so outwardly showy with your directorial choices. Obviously, it's a very simple story. It's a simple romance drama. And with that, though, I think it's a bit underrated with some of her choices. And, you know, you talk about the camera work, and it's been talked about with the last scene of how it follows them to the left, going to the future, and then she walks back, whatever. That's all talked about at length. To me, it just shows that, I don't know, I don't want to sound cliche, but I watched this, and while it's not the most showy effort, I feel like it's incredibly like confident with its choices. And I guess that can go to the script, which you also wrote, but you also just kind of know when to trust yourself and let the actors work, or when to just keep it simple is the best option. So to me, she is definitely a filmmaker to watch. I mean, obviously, if this is your first effort, one would hope that you would only get better. So I think we got one. We got a good one.
We sure do. Here's the biggest snub for me. Score. How was it not shortlisted? How was this not even in the damn conversation? This should have been nominated. This should have been a win contender. Like, that music is just so warm and comforting, and it just fills the film with this beautiful energy. It perfectly captures everything that the movie is doing. And one thing I really noticed on this watch, they talk about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I know, John, you're not a huge fan of that movie, but they talk about that movie very early on into the film. And then I started to notice how the score feels like the music in that movie too. And it has that sort of John Bryan, like early 2000s indie score vibe to it. But yeah, I just love the music here, and I just do not get how it didn't even make the short list.
Indiana Jones, man. Tough to beat.
Well, we can't blame Indiana Jones for not making the short list. I'm gonna blame American
I will
Symphony.
I will always blame Indiana Jones.
I'll go to bat for Indiana Jones' score. I will, honestly.
Oh man.
I mean, the other score people knock when it's American Fiction. I'll go to bat for that one. But yeah, Past Lives feels like a weird exclusion from the short list because it's not a bad score. While I'm not in love with the score, I understand where its strengths lie, and I think it's one that's very much better outside of the film than inside the film. I think it's one that you can easily just put on and listen to and like study music, calming music. While in the film, I don't notice it as much, but sometimes the best scores are the most unnoticeable ones. But I agree with what you said before, Matt, where it does its job here. I wouldn't go as far to say like with directing, where I would be like, oh, I'm clamoring for the nomination. I'm upset that it didn't get in, but I do appreciate that it is good work.
Yeah, I really thought it'd make at least the shortlist, and I know it's so stupid to get mad over a shortlist, but with the score, I mean, that last scene as she's walking back to Arthur, score is just popping off. So to me, I thought like that was a very like clear, distinct, like if you don't notice the score in the beginning, you sure as hell notice it now. Mm-hmm. And that's the ending where it leaves you off. So I really thought it was going to get in. That was like my called shot from the beginning. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is going to get into score. And then it just get destroyed.
It constantly missed along the way. It was wild. I think the moment of the music that I noticed most isn't the ending. It's I do really notice the ending, especially with the taxi and everything. Beautiful use of music there. But I love when they're on the boat circling around the Statue of Liberty and the guitar strumming starts. Oh, God, so good. So good. Now, I have a question for you guys. Teo, supporting or lead? And if he was put into supporting, would he be nominated? Because I really think that his fault was that he doesn't... he's more than a supporting performance, not quite a lead, but obviously doesn't have enough to make it into a field of leads, but would slay in supporting. I don't know.
I guess this year it's really hard to go about it because I honestly think both of those categories are pretty stacked. Even thinking even thinking objectively, they're stacked with higher Best Picture contenders. So, like, if he would go into supporting, who would he take out? Because the easy answer could be Sterling K. Brown, but I honestly don't know if Sterling K. Brown was number 5. I think the support of American fiction, and I mean, this is where my subjectiveness comes in, how he is the highlight of that film, how a lot of other people have kind of spoken up recently and agreed with that. I think he was kind of safe in there after his SAG nomination. I would say 5 would be De Niro, but it also feels weird for De Niro to miss for a performance like this, even if I like this one more. So lead is where I would put him personally, but again, if we're thinking, taking out our personal things, looking at the status of the race, he would not be stronger, even if he got in at other places, than any of the 5 men who did get in. Because again, who would be 5? Jeffrey Wright, maybe, Coleman Domingo, maybe, but they hit everywhere. And even if Teo got in at some other spots, I don't think that would be strong enough to crack that lineup.
Yeah, for me personally, I would put him in lead. I wouldn't. I mean, first of all, I don't even care about category fraud anymore. I just don't have the energy to care. But if they did slot him in supporting, at least I could understand that. Like I could get behind it. Personally, I would have him in lead. But yeah, then it goes to like supporting, especially. It's like, who is number 5? Like, is it Ruffalo just because it missed? But then Poor Things seems like it was on the way up. Like De Niro, Sterling K. Brown. I mean, speaking subjectively, there's very easy options to take out in lead actor for Teo Yoo, in my opinion. But I know realistically, it just wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't in the cards for him. And I felt like people felt that way even at Sundance. They're like, don't know if that's the type, which is crazy. I think he should have been like, he should so clearly been like a bigger deal, and maybe that's on us as pundits, you know, to already start off the year being like, probably not going to happen, but he should have very
push
easily
harder for it.
yeah, probably.
I said this before. I think he is the highlight of this film. I think he's phenomenal, and his role is so meaty as well. If his performance still wasn't as great as it was, this is still a role that just has so much to offer. I feel like you can feel his pain, his longing for connection, and just, especially with his eyes and his mannerisms, it just feels like he's always desperate and hopes that every action and every line that he delivers will kind of work in his favor, especially early on. I think once he walks around with Nora, meets Arthur, he starts to feel a little bit differently. But when we have the Skype scenes, you can tell how hard he's trying to make this work, how happy he is in those situations, and then how devastated he is when Nora says, I think we should stop talking. And I think we don't need to have that moment for when Nora and Arthur go to Korea and it's like, oh, I wish I could have saw you. We don't need to have that moment to know how much that hurt him, because he doesn't even address it as they're walking. He just ignores that part and continues with the conversation. And we can tell her getting into a relationship so soon after ending whatever you want to call it theirs just wrecked him as a person. And I think just the way that he carries himself off of the page, just his mannerisms like I mentioned before, but then when you add in his verbal stuff, the way he reads these lines, to Matt's point before, just feels so realistic. This doesn't feel like we're watching a movie at times. It feels like it's actually real conversations happening in front of us.
Yeah, Teo, oh man, I would have put him in supporting personally, but I'm wild with that. I go for the category fraud so much. But yeah, if he was put in supporting, I would actually say that the whole year would have looked different. Like, if at the last second he was put in supporting, obviously he wouldn't knock anyone out. But I think if the whole year we'd been saying he's supporting, then I do kind of feel like he would have been one of those top 3 slots that we would have just been like, that's a given. He's just in. But obviously at this point, you know, he got no critic nominations. He got just the BAFTA. So he kind of just was out of the race in general. I just think there is a different world where they could have really campaigned and gotten him into some of those places. But for me, the thing I love about his performance is that subtle, guarded, he's not going to let on that he's hurting, but he's definitely hurting. My favorite moment of his is on the Skype call when Nora says, I don't think we should talk anymore. And she's like, are you upset by that? And he's like, no, it's not like we're dating or anything. And in that moment, you really feel that it's his hopes, it's his dreams, it's what he wants. And he's saying, oh, of course it's fine. Like, it's fine. I just love that. His whole performance kind of radiates that, I'm fine, but actually I'm really not. I'm hiding something. It's a magnificent performance, and definitely would be like top 5 performances of the year for me. He's so clearly head and shoulders above everyone else in the film, and that's crazy too, because like Greta Lee is also amazing in the movie. She's so good. So for you, Teo, to be just like leagues ahead is just like wild.
I think one interesting thing that you mentioned there is how he mentions how he's fine, but his actions don't show that, because I know we had a conversation about this in the Discord yesterday with some of our server members. That's how I kind of feel about John Magaro. I think he does say, hey, it's fine. This is your life. It's not room for me to talk about anything for you wanting to meet him. But all of his body mannerisms, his vocal tone, his appearance all show that he is very uncomfortable with this, but he doesn't want to neglect Noor's wants and needs in those situations. And I think as the scene plays on, we get to see him become more comfortable having the conversation. And I just think John Magaro, while I wouldn't nominate him, I never really got the reason for like, oh, we need to have him in. He's really good in his part. I think he has, like I mentioned before numerous times, the scene of the film, the most important, the biggest takeaway from the film is, I think, that bedroom scene for me. But again, it's just a performance where, again, I've mentioned this in multiple of these revisiting episodes, I would like to have seen more from that character. I understand it's not his story, it's not his perspective, but it would have been cool if we got maybe just one extra scene, maybe away from Noor, just him at the house when he's playing video games, just what's in his mind. Maybe that would be too direct, too on the nose, but there was always these times where like I can get the subtlety of John Magaro's character's thoughts of like how he's letting her do this, but the whole time whenever they talk about it, he always has this weird tone to him. It's like, so do you find him hot? Is he cool? What'd y'all do today? And then immediately follows up by saying like, oh, do you love me? Or and stuff like that, where you can feel that he is at odds, but he can't physically act on those odds.
Yeah. A lot here. So with John Magaro, I mean, I love how this movie doesn't like judge any of its characters. There's no stance that Celine Song is taking, because she could have so easily like villainized any one of them, really. And like being in a relationship, it would be totally normal if in this movie John Magaro, Arthur, was like completely uncomfortable and like didn't want her to hang out. Not saying that's like you should be controlling or anything, but when you're in a relationship, if someone's uncomfortable, like you have to address that, and that would be a totally normal thing to be uncomfortable with. So you can kind of see his maybe insecurities is a little too strong a word, but you can definitely see how he feels about that. And with Teo Yoo, as you're speaking when she first says like, we shouldn't see each other anymore, basically, I say this as a compliment. He's like a kid. He's like a kid again with his mannerisms. Just totally like dejected, like acts like he doesn't care, even though he so clearly does. But there's nothing so like outwardly showy about any of the performances, which is why it makes it all the more impressive when it kind of goes to the future and he's in her with her in New York. Like it's still all subtleties, but you can just see how he's changed and how he still feels inside. So it's just a bunch of great writing and acting from everyone.
Mm-hmm. I like that you brought up that he does feel like a kid, because it kind of goes back to that past life thing, that she makes him feel like someone he once was. He kind of reverts back to that younger self when he's around her. That's a really cool takeaway from that role. John Magaro is really strong in this. He just suffers from having the smallest role in the movie. But again, this year we have 2 people nominated for Oscars who have objectively the same amount of material, right? You've got America Ferrera and Emily Blunt both having Oscar nominations for having one great scene, and here John Magaro has one great scene, and the rest of the movie he's kind of just there. And he's doing what he needs to. He's doing well, but really the shining point of his whole performance is that one scene. But something very interesting that you're kind of bringing up, Dylan, is that you're seeing the film really through the lens of that character of John Magaro. And I think something that comes up with Celine Song's treatment of this, her non-judgmental stance, the way that she treats these characters with empathy, I think that you can view the movie through so many different lenses, because it's a film about it's not just a film about leaving somewhere to go somewhere else and feeling like you've left your past behind. It's not just a film about what could have been romantically. It's also a film about being with someone who you can tell is drifting into the distance. It's also a film about being with someone that you know you can never fully be their everything, because they had a full life before you were there. There's so much in this, and depending on how you come into the film, you're going to get something completely different out of it. Because I don't think there's any one message that you're meant to take away from this movie. There's like 12 different ones, and it all depends on your own life experience.
The way he was cuddling with her on the bed in the first, when he's like introduced on the bed, like, yo, my guy is like
love.
all up. Yeah. You saw his leg was like all the way up, just like totally wrapped in. Like, I respect it.
In a way, does that almost feel like what Celine Song's saying there is that he's kind of like not suffocating her, but in a way like he is kind of really trying to like, I don't know, be her everything. I don't know. There's something there that he's like so overwhelmingly like all over her. I don't know.
Maybe what I think is the biggest takeaway between those two interactions is how Celine Song's husband is writing Challengers, which is a movie about a woman with two men. Maybe that's his perspective of the whole situation. But you talk about John Magaro missing out of the nomination here. And to I guess the comparison you made for supporting actress, I see it, but I think it's just all of how the categories are stacked. Supporting actress was a wasteland this year. I think that's how Blunt and Ferrer got in. I think normally maybe one could have, but they both got it. Where in supporting actor, we just mentioned how stacked it was for you, Teo, not to get in. John Magaro having even less than... I just think that there wasn't an avenue where maybe this was a year like when Troy Kotsur won, where who was number 5 all year? We didn't know. Easily, John Magaro could have slid his way into that field. But supporting actor was stacked. Lead actress was stacked. Greta Lee misses out. Was she 6? Was she 7? Margot Robbie also missed for Barbie. I think these are two performances I fully get why people want them in. I fully get why people would have them on the outside looking in. I just think I just think all of our acting categories besides supporting actress this year are so stacked. You could take anyone from the top 7 and I would feel good, and I will fully take my L for saying I think Annette Bening is good at Naiad. I wouldn't nominate her, but she's
Dylan's
doing the
taking
role.
Netflix money.
I have no Netflix money. I wish.
She's on the Netflix payroll. That's yeah, Greta Lee is so good here. And I will say I don't think she'd be in my personal top 5 for Best Actress, but I understand the upset at a snub here. And I do think that some of the energy directed towards Margot Robbie not being in the category, because there was such an outrage online about that, some of that energy definitely should have been channeled towards Greta Lee. I barely saw anyone talking about the Greta Lee snub out there, but I don't know. I do think some of that energy should have been taken from Margot Robbie over to Greta Lee. But I love her work in this. It's subtle. It's beautiful. It is what the film is. It's there's no big moments. It's all bubbling under the surface. And that really is shown in that final scene when she walks Hae-sung to his Uber, and then she walks back, and only then does she break down, because it's like the door is finally actually closing.
Yeah, I mean, I love Greta Lee in this movie. I mean, she would be in my personal 5, and the answer is very simple. I mean, we can just remove Annette Bening, and
get her out.
That's just goodbye. Have fun. No, and we could just slide Greta Lee in. I would have taken Margot Robbie over Annette Bening. I would take Greta Lee over Annette Bening. I would take a lot of people over Annette Bening, and I like Annette Bening a lot. Just Naiad was not it. That was just wasn't it. So in that regard, it's disappointing. But like of course I understand. I mean, this movie is just full of like so many subtleties that it really is just hard to break into acting if you're not outwardly, capital A acting, if you're not yelling or just some super duper close up knockout crying scene. That's just how it goes. and I understand it, but it's tough beat for me.
That's now going to move us into what I think is one of the funnest parts of these revisiting series, hearing our guests' preferential ballads. So, Jonathan, you've seen all 10 films. Which one would you put all the way at the bottom at number 10?
Okay, number 10 is Maestro.
Maestro at
but
the bottom.
I'm not a hater, though. I'm not a Maestro hater.
Good.
It's just
Glad to hear it.
This lineup is strong. This lineup is strong. I think Maestro is solid. A lot of good things about it, but it would be at number 10 for sure. Then we get to American Fiction at 9. I like American Fiction quite a bit, but at the end of the day, it's not really one that I'm going to remember or take away much from it. I appreciate its satire. I like how witty it is. Genuinely was hilarious when I saw it at TIFF, but that's kind of where it ends with me personally. And then we get into like real bangers. Like I love all these movies, so like one of them has to be 8. I'd probably go Poor Things next, and I say that as an Emma Stone stan, Arizona's own. Love her. I loved Poor Things. It's just at the end of the day, I just prefer the ones above it. Kind of simple as that. Nothing negative on Poor Things at all. I would go Zone of Interest next.
Whoa.
Okay. I really liked the Zone of Interest, and I liked it more on a rewatch. But like at the end of the day, similar to what I just said about Poor Things, I prefer the other ones. Zone of Interest, not a fantastic watch. So that's just kind of where that goes. Let's see. Then I would go Anatomy of a Fall. Great performances, love a crime thriller, courtroom drama. That's that. Killers of the Flower Moon next. Once again, a rewatch definitely helps with Killers of the Flower Moon for me, which I know is tough for a 3.5-hour movie, but I rewatched it in theaters, so that's a free pass right there. I thought it worked a lot better to me on a rewatch. Then I go The Holdovers. It just makes me feel good. I still think it's a little bit too long, but the vibes are immaculate. The vibes are immaculate. Paul Giamatti is king. I'd go Barbie, and this is gonna sound stupid, but it's just too much fun. I'm sorry, it's too much fun. This is personal preference. If you hold up a copy of Barbie and a copy of The Zone of Interest, I am going to choose Barbie to rewatch, and that is as simple as that. Then I would go
fair.
Past Lives, and then I would go Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer became number 1 on its 3rd watch. So Past Lives had the belt for a really long time. And then
man.
it all of a sudden just Oppenheimer just took its lunch money.
Oppenheimer with the steel chair.
Yep. Honestly, the people's elbow right at the very end.
Exactly. The iron claw right there.
I think that's a pretty fun lineup. Like you mentioned, I think this is the best picture lineup, at least of my lifetime. I know some people will go to bat for 2019, but my lowest movie in the lineup for spoilers has been The Holdovers, and that was like a solid 7. So I think a solid 7, when that's your number 10 movie, speaks volumes of how your overall best picture lineup is. But that's going to bring us to the conclusion of this episode, Revisiting Past Lives. As I said before, if you're new here, consider a like, comment. We want to hear your thoughts about Past Lives, as well as a subscription, because we're up next. We are talking Killers of the Flower Moon. But until then, my name's Dyl.
My name's Matt, and I want to thank the Film Drunk for coming in to talk to us today. Thanks you so much for being here, man. Always appreciate it.
Anytime, of course.
And of course, this is Fantasy Filmball.